Hey everybody, today we're going to knock out triangle properties, node sheet 1. We're going to get into some coordinate geometry. It's still going to involve triangles, but now we're going to be using coordinates, on the coordinate plane. And I think it'll help. I think that's sort of my goal here, is you being able to see exactly what's going on and why it's going on. If you were in my class, I would tell you to try this on your own really quick. But right now you're watching the video, so we're just going to cut to it, and we are going to draw the picture and see what's going on. So we have point A, we have point B, and we have point C, and they should be right about there. So we'll label those real quick. Okay. Step 2, y is the midpoint of AB. So you're supposed to find it and mark it. Now in this case, you could take these two numbers. You could find the midpoint of them by adding the x values and dividing by 2, adding the y values and dividing by 2, or you could just look at the picture and you could kind of piece together where you think the midpoint is going to be. Either way, you should get -4, 2, and we're going to label that point y. All right, so there you go. So we've got this triangle, and if you want, it did say draw the triangle, so if you want to cut to the chase and draw the triangle right now, that wouldn't be a bad idea. And then again, you should have y, which should be right in the middle of segment AB. Okay. Z is the midpoint of BC. So now you've got another option here. You could either figure out the midpoint by looking at the points, or you could just look at the picture for counting squares, figure out where the midpoint is. Turns out it should be 0, 2, which should be right there. And this is where we're going to get some interesting stuff going on. So you've got YZ. All right, there you go. So the question said, question number 4, draw YZ. How long is it? Okay, so we had Y was the midpoint of AB. That was -4, 2. Z was the midpoint of BC. That was 0, 2. And so you could either count squares, or you could just look at the 2 points and you could recognize that YZ had a length of 4. Okay, so that length right there was 4. It's not a coincidence. If you look at question number 5, how long was AC? If you were to count the squares from -5, 2 to 3, 2, it was 8. That is not a coincidence. This was 4. This was 8. That is not a coincidence. And that's one of the things we're going to talk about today. All right, now X is the midpoint of AC. Draw 2 more segments using point X. All right, so there you go. So we're going to have point X right in the middle here. All right, right halfway in the middle. And then we want to draw 2 more segments that are based off of point X. There you go. So what we have here, we actually have a pretty cool looking picture. There are a few things I want you to notice about this. Okay. Now, I know you probably can't do this other relationship in your head, but it's going to hold true all 3 times. That line that we just drew, this blue line that we drew right here, is going to be half the length of this. And this blue line that we just drew right here is going to be half the length of this. So that pattern is going to hold true every single time. So just how we had the 4 and the 8, even if it comes out to decimals, the pattern is still going to hold true. Now, the other thing I want you to see in this picture is that YZ is running side by side with AC. It's going in the same direction. It is parallel. And that's another pattern that's going to hold true no matter which figure you look at. So we could use that same concept here. Okay, so I'm going to look at this segment, and I'm going to look at this segment. the same rule applies. And again, it's not a coincidence. You could actually do it a third time. This particular segment right here, which we're going to learn in a second, that's called a midsegment, is parallel to this side. So again, none of those things are coincidences. Those are all truths that we can make out of this situation. All right, so I guess that means we should actually get to the vocabulary here. All right, so we start with a midsegment. A midsegment makes pretty good sense. You're talking about a segment that's coming from the middle. So that would be a segment connecting the midpoints of two of the sides of a triangle. Okay. So if you have two midpoints and you connect them, you get a midsegment. And there should be three of them in each triangle. All right, now let's take the things that we just came up with and let's try to sound smart. Let's try the triangle midsegment theorem. There you go. That sounds pretty smart. Let's go with it. So the triangle midsegment theorem says if a segment joins the midpoints of two sides of a triangle, that would be a midsegment in case you haven't picked up on that. If a segment joins the two sides of a triangle, then the segment is parallel to the third side, which we already marked, and half as long. Okay, so pause it if you need to write a little bit longer. If a segment joins the midpoints, if you draw a midsegment inside a triangle, that segment will be parallel to the third side, and it will be half as long. So that's the rule. That's how it's going to be pretty much every time. Now, when we start talking about my fancy artistic interpretation, I just used ABC for this one. I'm not going to do anything fancy. And I mean, for that matter, we can just call all of these ABC. The reason I drew it 3 times is because I want you to see all 3 relationships, and I want you to see them as clearly as I can make them here. So, if I told you that this length was 6, and then I gave you the midpoints of these 2 segments, what you would discover 2 things. Number 1, these 2 would be parallel. And number 2, this length would be 3. Okay, so those are the 2 key things you can get out of this picture. Okay, we could do it again. Just make sure we understand the topic here. Okay, so we've got this and this. Let's say I give you 2 midpoints. So 2 of the 3 sides of the triangle, I'm giving you midpoints here. Well, what you would be able to get out of that would be, first of all, this, and I'll use a different marking, is going to be parallel to the opposite side right there. And then it is going to be half as long. So if I told you that the whole thing, if I told you this midsegment was 4, that would tell you the whole thing was 8. Okay, so it's important to kind of pick up on exactly what's going on here. Last one, we'll do one more picture here with the third midsegment. So let's take the only pair that we haven't dealt with together. That would be right here and right here. And so again, 2 things will apply. Rule number 1, it will be parallel. The midsegment will be parallel to the third side. And number 2, if I told you that this long side of the triangle was 8, or I'm sorry, 8 was the last one. If I told you it was 10, then that would mean the midsegment would have a length of 5. That's it. That's all you got to remember. Now we're going to go in a little bit more depth as we go through the worksheets, but for now, that's a really good place to start. I hope this helps, and I will see you next time.